Thank you. Doesn't make much sense, but today in America, millions of our fellow citizens wake up and go to work with the awareness that they could lose their job, not because of anything they do or fail to do, but because of who they are. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And that's wrong. In a few moments, I will sign an executive order that does two things. First, the federal government already prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Once I sign this order, the same will be explicitly true for gender identity. And second, we're going to prohibit all companies that receive a contract from the federal government from discriminating against their LGBT employees. America's federal contracts should not subsidize discrimination against the American people. We're on the right side of history. I'm going to sign this executive order. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, let me try to explain some things, because the issue seems to be the federal government funding anything or you doing business with the federal government as a contractor or subcontractor, and therefore you cannot, quote, discriminate based on your religious beliefs. As the caller just said, you should not be able, as a Christian institution, if you receive any federal funding, to hold anyone to Christian morals. If someone is openly living in adultery or fornication or alcoholism, and they cannot sign a code of conduct with your institution, if you get federal funds, you have to ignore your moral standards and your Christian beliefs. Obviously, that's a massive misunderstanding of the function of the federal government, whose goal is not to ban religion. And to say this is a democracy, not a theocracy, yes, it's a democracy, not a theocracy. If it was a theocracy, we would require, everyone would be required to live by God's standards or die, as happened in ancient Israel. This is not a theocracy. But this is also not a democracy that is antagonistic to religion. In fact, it is based on and founded on freedom of religion. And the government has always dealt with and done business with organizations of faith that hold faith standards, and the government has never required them to violate them until now, until the actions of President Obama. This is an act of discrimination against religion in the name of anti-discrimination. It is an act of bullying in the name of preventing bullying. Joseph Backholm, writing for the Family Policy Institute of Washington, said this, and he wrote this yesterday. Speaking of the day before, yesterday, President Obama signed an executive order to prohibit the federal government from contracting with anyone who, quote, discriminates on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. In short, it forces the 24,000 entities who contract with the federal government and employ 28 million workers, about 1/5 of the nation's workforce, to promise that they will never decline to hire someone based on their sexual activity or desire to be a different gender. As a result, any church, nonprofit organization, or business that believes marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman, a position the president agreed with only 2 years ago, could be ineligible to compete for public contracts or grants. The executive order also bans, quote, discrimination against federal employees based on their gender identity. In recognition of the fact that every major religion has taught that sexuality is best confined to natural marriage for thousands of years, a request for religious exemptions from the mandate was made. That request was denied. So I have a simple question. Let's say you have a man who is transitioning to be a woman. He's convinced that he is a woman suffering from gender dysphoria, and he is now transitioning to be a woman. So first he's going to dress as a woman and then get on hormone treatments, then have sex change surgery. So he is clearly, physically, evidently a man. He starts to grow his hair. He wants to teach at a nursery school, and the nursery school, some federal funding for educational activities in nursery school gets funds. They would be required to hire him to teach 4-year-olds. It doesn't matter what confusion it would bring to 4-year-olds. They would be required to hire him. That is utterly outrageous. If you pull churches and religious organizations out of the mix and then look at charitable work done in the inner cities, on the streets, among the poor, among the needy, you would suddenly have a massive, massive, massive void, because these are the groups far and away that are most active. You just go somewhere where the disaster takes place. You don't see normally a big truck, from Richard Dawkins' atheist organization, but you'll see World Vision, or you'll see Operation Blessing, or you'll see Samaritan's Purse. You'll see other Christian organizations, the first ones there. Let's say they receive federal funding to help in some of their larger work. It all goes in the same budget. Let's say they use some of that for disaster relief. No, you can't, unless you violate your sexual moral code. That's what this is saying, and that is why it is so outrageous. And that's why all the president had to do was sign an exemption for religious organizations so they could practice their faith freely. Instead, he trampled on that in the name of anti-discrimination, thereby terribly discriminating against millions and millions and millions of Americans.